As the first rays of sunlight broke through the mist-covered rooftops of Crestwood, the whole neighborhood was still fast asleep. Only one woman had been up for hours, not to prepare for a meeting, nor to receive an award, but to rediscover herself through the very creation she had once poured her soul into. Her name was Valerie Harper, CEO and founder of Harper Motors, one of the fastest-growing auto dealership chains in the United States. On the cover of Forbes, she had been dubbed the woman who could sell cars through trust. But today, Valerie wasn't wearing a blazer. She wasn't heading to headquarters with sunglasses and a fleet of assistants. Today, she became Lila, a new hire applying for a job at the Crestwood branch. The very first showroom she had built with her own hands nearly 20 years ago. Because some truths can only be seen when we give up our seat of power. Because some wounds will never heal unless we dare to touch them. Lately, Valerie had received too many anonymous emails, whispers in the hallway, glances that quickly looked away during performance meetings. Employees were quitting without explanation. Customers complained about being pressured into purchases, about being disrespected. She once dismissed it as a management issue until a former employee sent her an audio recording where the name of the Crestwood showroom manager was mentioned as someone who runs things through intimidation, not policy. That night, Valerie couldn't sleep. She thought back to the early days, when Harper Motors was just a tiny office, no signage, no business account, when she personally delivered the first car to a customer, wiped each windshield by hand, and kept a list of those who had turned her down not for revenge, but so that one day she could find a better way to serve them. Valerie knew if she didn't step down now, everything she had built would turn into an empty name. She dyed her hair a dark brown, chose a plain button-up shirt, wore a pair of shoes she had once borrowed from her sister back in college, and stood in front of the mirror, rehearsing a voice that wasn't her own. As she stepped into the showroom, she told herself, "Don't let anyone know you're the CEO. Let them see a woman with nothing but a belief in how people deserve to be treated." She didn't know that today would be the day she would come face to face with a system so warped it would break her heart. She also didn't know that she herself would be changed forever. But what she knew, more than anything, was that the truth could never stay hidden under fluorescent lights and KPI dashboards. It lives in how people speak when they think no one's listening. It lives in the way a customer walks out, either with a smile or with eyes quietly wounded. Valerie stepped through the glass doors not to observe, but to listen with her whole heart. The automatic doors opened as Valerie, now Lila, stepped inside. The familiar scent of new car plastic, Harper Motors' signature essential oil, and soft background music greeted her, but it didn't feel the same. She used to love that scent. It represented new beginnings. But today, it felt like something manufactured to impress, not to connect. The Crestwood showroom gleamed with LED lighting, marble floors, SUVs and sports cars arranged on raised platforms, price tags screaming like predators waiting to pounce on unsuspecting visitors. Everything was perfect, but cold. In front of her, a tall man approached, slicked back hair like he was ready for a commercial. a confident smile that screamed he was the brand. Lila. "Right, I'm Trent, the manager here," he said, extending his hand. The handshake was firm, too firm. The smile was wide, but it never reached his eyes. "We only care about one thing here, sales. If you can sell, great. If you can't..." He shrugged, letting the sentence dangle. Valerie returned a polite smile, the kind a job seeker might give. But inside, something sank, not because of what he said, but because, right here, nearly 20 years ago, she and 3 friends had laid down tiles, painted walls, and built the very first foundations of Harper Motors. Right there where the finance desk now stood, she had once placed a folding table to consult with her first customers, her hands trembling because she wasn't sure she could make the sale. Valerie wondered, how many people on this team even know? This place wasn't built just on borrowed money, but on borrowed faith. She followed Trent on a tour of the showroom. No one greeted her with eye contact, not a single genuine smile. A young staffer brushed past without looking up, tossing out a line, "Newbie." "Huh, good luck. Around here, customers are cash mines. Watch you don't get drained." Valerie heard it clearly and also felt the tightening in her chest. No one asked her name. No one offered guidance. All she got from Trent was a sheet of paper listing her sales targets. Then, nothing. She stood alone, in the very place that had once been her life's dream, now unfamiliar, almost alien. Not because the facility had changed, but because the soul of this place had quietly slipped away. And what hurt Valerie most wasn't being ignored like she was invisible. It was realizing that if she hadn't come here in disguise, she might never have known that Harper Motors was now selling cars through fear, not trust. She took a deep breath, fingers tightening around the target sheet. Not because of pressure to meet sales quotas, but because behind those numbers was a culture falling apart. If I don't stop this today, there'll be nothing left to save, Valerie thought silently. And so she began her workday, not as the CEO, but as someone trying to rebuild the ruins with her own 2 hands. The morning shift began. Valerie, under the name Lila, stood behind the consultation desk, observing like a shadow. No one noticed her. No one asked if she needed help. She was left alone, as if her presence wasn't even worth a minute of training. Up front, laughter rang out, not the kind that welcomes customers, but the kind that mocks them behind their backs. A middle-aged man had just walked out of the showroom, not even in his car yet, when 2 employees started jeering. "That guy's so dumb he doesn't even know he just signed for double the standard interest rate. Told you throw in 2 extra warranty options and call it a special bundle. They always fall for it." Valerie froze, not because of the words, but because of how casually they were spoken, as if it had become routine. Trent sat in his glass office, sipping coffee from an expensive mug, staring out with a blank expression. But every time a contract was signed, he would stand up, step out, and clap someone on the back. "Nice one. Don't forget the processing fee. We're not selling cars. We're selling persuasion." Valerie turned her face away, not to hide pain, but to hide the look of someone who had just realized her dream had been twisted into something unrecognizable. She had once taught every customer who leaves our showroom with a smile that's long-term success. But here, every customer walked out with vacant eyes while the staff looked at them like nothing more than numbers. A young employee named Sherry walked into Trent's office to request a few days off to care for her sick mother. Valerie listened from a distance. I'm only asking for 3 days without pay. My mum just had heart surgery. Trent raised an eyebrow, then cut her off. Sherry, I need people who sell cars, not people who bring their personal lives in here. You take time off, you lose your slot. Someone's already waiting to take your place. Sherry fell silent, nodding like a machine, too drained to even resist. Valerie clenched her fists. She used to think Trent was a high-performance manager, but now she saw him for what he was: a man who used KPIs to justify cruelty. Across the floor, an elderly customer asked about an electric vehicle. The salesperson responded with a few indifferent words, then said bluntly, "That model doesn't get any discounts. If you want to save money, buy a used one." The customer gave a strained smile and quietly walked away. Valerie followed him, not to sell, but just to offer an apology. But he was already gone, disappearing into traffic like a shame the showroom was trying to bury. Valerie stood still in the center of the showroom. The LED lights buzzed faintly overhead. The promo screen played a scene of a happy family laughing inside a shiny new SUV. But in reality, this place was slowly suffocating everything good bit by bit. If this is how they're hitting sales goals, I'd rather let the company lose money than let people lose their faith in humanity. Valerie understood now. She wasn't just undercover to investigate. She was walking through a soulless version of Harper Motors. The morning passed in a chilling atmosphere. Valerie, as Lila, kept watching, enduring in silence. But then, the moment came, the incident that made it impossible for her to stay quiet any longer. A young couple walked into the showroom. The young man wore a faded button-down shirt and held a piece of paper covered in notes. The girl beside him clutched her purse tightly, her eyes shimmering with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Valerie recognized that look immediately. She had once seen it in herself when she bought her first car to do delivery work in her early 20s. It wasn't just about buying a vehicle, it was about buying a turning point in life. Valerie was about to approach and greet them, but before she could say a word, a familiar voice cut in. "Let me handle this," Trent said, stepping in and brushing her aside with a glance. "This couple's an easy one. Just watch and learn." He threw his arm around the young man like an old friend. "I know this is your first time buying a car. Today's your lucky day. I've got a brand new sporty SUV killer deal only if you sign today." The young man hesitated. We were hoping for something smaller. Maybe something more fuel efficient." Trent burst out laughing, then turned to Valerie with a mocking tone. "Did you hear that? Lila, fuel efficient, classic fresh grads. Can't even tell what quality looks like." The girl flushed red. The young man looked down, embarrassed. Valerie clenched her fists. But Trent kept going, reeling off inflated discount packages and a barrage of sneaky hidden fees. As the couple started to waver, the light in their eyes fading, Trent tapped on the paperwork. "Listen, If you don't sign now, the price goes up tomorrow. I'm saving you thousands right this second." The girl turned to her boyfriend, whispering, "Maybe we should wait a few more days. Talk to our parents first." And that was it. Valerie couldn't take it anymore. She stepped forward, gently but firmly. Maybe they'd like to see a few more models, something that fits their budget a little better. She looked Trent straight in the eyes, no more hiding. Trent froze. For a moment, the entire room went still. "Lila, you're new." "I don't recall anyone asking for your opinion," he said coldly. Valerie didn't back down. "You're right," Valerie said. "I am new. But there's one thing I know. Selling cars by pushing people into debt isn't selling. It's deception." The room fell completely silent. The customers looked at her stunned, grateful. The other employees held their breath. Trent's voice dropped low, his eyes flaring. "Who do you think you are to dare?" Valerie cut him off, her voice calm but powerful. "I'm someone who believes. Customers aren't targets. They're people who need to be guided, not shoved off a cliff." Then she turned to the young couple. "Let me show you a few other models, ones that are truly good and don't require you to sell your peace of mind to afford them." They nodded, quietly following her. Valerie led them to a quieter corner of the showroom where the smaller sedans were neatly lined up. No bright lights, no flashy signs. But she knew this is where honesty still lived. As they tried sitting inside one of the cars, the young woman smiled for the first time since walking into the showroom. The young man leaned toward Valerie and whispered, "Thank you. We just wanted something good enough to start with." Valerie nodded, her eyes misting over. Because sometimes the biggest beginnings in life only require someone brave enough to stand up for what's right. As she walked the couple to the door, their shoulders lighter than when they entered, Valerie turned around and locked eyes with Trent. He stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, his face tight like a ticking bomb. Before she could say a word, he stepped forward and spoke loud enough for the whole team to hear. "Lila, who the hell do you think you are?" Valerie kept her voice steady. "I did what was right. They couldn't afford the model you pushed on them. I just gave them a real choice." Trent sneered and stepped closer, his tone laced with unveiled contempt. "You've been here half a day and think you understand this business. If you can't close, don't ruin someone else's deal. What do you know about sales? About the pressure to keep a place like this running?" Valerie replied, eyes unblinking. "I know that people who go into 7 years of debt just to buy a car don't need more pressure piled on top from tactics like yours." The air in the showroom grew heavy. Employees stopped typing. Walk-in customers quietly backed away from the consultation area. All eyes were locked on the two of them. Trent growled each word. "This is my system," Trent barked. "Here, I decide who sells and who shuts up. And you're nothing." Valerie pressed her lips together, and a feeling she'd been holding down all morning surged to the surface, the anger of someone watching her dream being warped by the hands of someone unworthy. But instead of shouting, she simply spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "You're wrong. This system doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to the culture of an entire company. And if what you call operations is just pressure, coercion, and manipulation, then it will collapse sooner or later. Trent's eyes widened in disbelief. No one had ever dared speak to him like that, especially not some new hire on her first day. "You don't know anything," he snapped, now genuinely furious. Valerie lowered her voice, but each word struck like a chisel against ice. "I know. People don't need to be pushed into a deal. They need to be understood. I know that a strong company isn't the one with the biggest revenue, but the one where people feel the most respected." For a strange, fleeting moment, Trent seemed pushed back not by force, but by the sheer weight of her calm. Valerie turned and walked away, saying nothing more. She headed toward the service area, where she knew there were no cameras, no supervisors, just a few techs quietly working on vehicles and chatting. She sat down, leaning against the cool wall, and closed her eyes. She wasn't afraid of Trent. She'd faced off against major corporations, fought for brand rights in rooms full of lawyers. But today, she felt pain because she understood when the wrong people believe they're right for too long, they begin to think truth-tellers are traitors. And if truth is considered betrayal, then maybe it's time to betray everything fake in this system. After the public clash with Trent, Valerie knew she had become a thorn in his side, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she took a step back to observe more deeply and to listen harder, no longer trying to score points or win over customers. Valerie spent most of her time in the corners. No one paid attention to the service bays, the desk in the far wall, the maintenance intake area where technicians occasionally wolfed down cold lunches from plastic containers. It was there that she began to see the quiet cracks in the system she had once believed to be solid. A technician named Jake, his hair streaked with grey, was called out by Trent for being 7 minutes late. No questions, no chance to explain. Trent slammed the work schedule onto the table, his voice like a whip. "Next time you're late, find another place to wash cars." Jake bowed his head, replying softly, "My wife was in the hospital last night. I took her to dialysis." There was no response. Trent had already turned his back, as if the moment never happened. Valerie stood nearby, her chest tightening. She had once said in a strategic meeting, "We're not just building a sales system, we're building a place where people can rise." But here, all she saw were people barely surviving. In the repair bay, Valerie came across Carlos, a tall technician with grease-covered hands, working carefully to reinstall the braking system on a family van that had been denied warranty coverage. He didn't say much, but every movement was deliberate, focused, like he was tending to something more important than just machinery. She asked gently, "Why are you spending over 40 minutes on such a small fix?" Carlos didn't look up. He just murmured, "Because I know the customer's gonna drive his daughter to school in this, and if those brakes fail, I won't sleep at night." Valerie stood still. No one saw Carlos do that. No one praised him. No one paid him extra. But he did it because right is right, even when no one's watching. She also met Mia, a young saleswoman carefully explaining a used compact car to an elderly woman. Mia spoke slowly, using simple terms, waiting patiently for the woman to nod after every detail. When the lady left, Valerie asked, "Why didn't you steer her toward the SUV on promotion?" Mia smiled softly. She said she had a stroke before. Driving a big car tires her out. I figured, if she were my grandma, I'd want the salesperson to really listen. Valerie was nearly in tears. The deeper she went, the more bitter a truth she uncovered. The best people in her system were being buried by a structure that only looked successful on the surface. While people like Trent were praised as efficient strategists, those like Jake, Carlos, and Mia were just forgotten names on a list. She sat down at a corner table in the parts department, pulled out her phone, and typed a note. "What I built has been hijacked by those who know how to play with numbers, but are blind to people." By late afternoon, as the showroom began to quiet down, Valerie looked around. A few people were rushing to close last-minute deals. Others were prepping for the end-of-day report, which, in essence, was just a tally of who sold how much. No one asked, "Were today's customers happy?" No one asked, "Are the employees okay?" Only KPIs, and a silence built from fear. Valerie understood. If she left tomorrow without doing something, it wouldn't just be her failure. It would be the moment the dream called Harper Motors would no longer belong to her. The more she watched blending into the background as the anonymous Lila, the heavier her heart grew. This showroom had once been the embodiment of a dream she wove out of trust in people. Now, it resembled a contract factory, more than a place where customers found real solutions. And yet, amidst the cracks, there were still signs of life pushing through. She began paying closer attention to Mia, the young woman with a genuine smile. Even when no one asked her to smile, Mia didn't shout to win customers. She didn't sugarcoat her words to pressure anyone into a deal. She was patient, gentle, and above all, never lied, even when telling the truth cost her a sale. Valerie overheard one of her conversations. "This model has a great price, but the long-term maintenance cost might be a bit high for you, sir. If you don't drive much, I don't think you'll need those extra features," Mia said softly to an older customer. Valerie watched as the older customer smiled, patting Mia's shoulder like he'd just found a long-lost relative in the business. Afterward, Mia returned to her desk and began meticulously jotting down everything the man had said, not for metrics, but to remember, to care for him later. Meanwhile, over in the service area, Carlos was working steadily as always, but that day, Valerie noticed something unusual. He was adjusting the seat of a small car, carefully adding a protective pad to the armrest, something not listed in the repair order. Valerie walked over, curious. "You added that extra part. Is it going on the invoice?" Carlos just shook his head. "The woman who drives this car. She's pregnant. I heard her mention it at the front desk. These next few months are going to be tough for her, so if there's anything I can do to make the ride a little easier, I'll do it." Valerie stood silently, in a place where value was measured by the number of zeros on a revenue sheet. Carlos still believed that kindness didn't need to show up on a receipt. One afternoon, she saw Jake, the older mechanic Trent had berated the day before, quietly splitting his modest lunch with a young janitor, rushing through a skipped meal. No thank yous, no show. Just an elder looking after someone younger the old way, the right way, the timeless way. Valerie scribbled into her notebook, Not everyone is broken. Some people, though, unrewarded still. Later that afternoon, as the workday wound down, Valerie walked out to the parking lot. She was about to leave when she spotted Mia speaking with a simply dressed, middle-aged woman. They stood in the golden glow of the setting sun, hair catching the light, a rare, peaceful moment in a place that seldom allowed space for gentleness. She caught fragments of their conversation. "I don't know if I'm good enough to last here." "Mom," Mia said softly. "But I think you're doing great," her mother replied. "And if this place can't see that it's their failure, not yours." Valerie turned away, but her chest trembled. She climbed into her car and sat still, not turning the key. In her head, a question echoed. How long has it been since I sat with my mother like that, just to hear someone remind me that all I had to do was stay true to myself? And then she typed quietly into her phone. There are people like Trent running this place through fear. But there are also people like Mia, Carlos, and Jake still holding on to the last pieces of this company's soul. The question isn't whether I should do something. It's that if I don't, I'll lose them forever. That afternoon, the showroom had begun to quiet. Employees were sipping coffee, checking their phones, waiting out the clock. The atmosphere dulled. But for Valerie, the most important moment of the day hadn't yet arrived. An old sedan pulled up outside. A thin woman, close to 70, slowly stepped out with a small cane and a worn paper envelope in her hand. She walked into the showroom like someone stepping into a foreign world full of bright lights, shiny glass, and young people moving fast. Valerie watched from a distance. No one approached. One employee glanced up, then returned to their phone. Another shook their head and muttered. Another old lady not buying anything. Waste of time. Valerie stood up abruptly, not for KPIs, not for permission, but because her heart wouldn't let this happen again. She walked briskly over, offering a genuine smile. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" The woman returned a hesitant smile, full of apology. "I just wanted to ask about a small car. Something easy to drive. I'm retired now. Just need to get to the market, and sometimes the hospital to visit friends." Valerie gently took her arm. "Then let me show you the area that suits you best. Nothing fancy, just something safe and dependable like you." She led her to the far corner of the showroom, where small, certified, pre-owned cars sat quietly, like forgotten children. Valerie opened the door of a modest hatchback, letting the woman sit inside. She didn't talk about pricing. She didn't upsell. She just listened. "This seat is so soft," the woman said, brushing the steering wheel. "I think I could drive this," Valerie asked. "Have you ever driven something like this before?" "The first car I had was my husband's old station wagon, but after he passed, I walked." The words caught in Valerie's throat. She stepped outside, pretending to inspect the tires just to hide the sting in her eyes. She didn't want the woman to see her getting emotional. But inside, something broke. Because the woman hadn't come to buy a car. She came to reclaim a little independence, a little freedom, in her final chapter. Mia watched quietly from the desk. She'd never seen Lila act like that, No pressure, no pitch, just empathy. As Valerie walked the woman out and gently helped her into her car, Mia approached hesitantly. "Have you sold cars for a long time?" she asked. Valerie smiled. "I used to sell something much harder than cars." "What was that?" Mia asked. "Trust." Mia blinked in surprise, then nodded. Slowly, as if she'd just grasped something bigger than the job itself. That evening, Valerie sat alone in the employee break room. She didn't take notes. She didn't review reports. She simply opened her phone and looked at a photo from Crestwood's grand opening. 18 years ago. She stood in the middle, flanked by her first 3 employees, all beaming in front of a wooden sign that read, "We don't sell cars, we help you find your way." And now, she had just brought those words to life again, not through a speech, but by sitting beside an old woman and asking, "Can I help you with anything today?" The day ended in a strange silence, but Valerie knew that silence was about to end. She walked into the operations office, calm yet resolute, claiming the excuse of a new hire needing urgent feedback. She requested a quick all-hands meeting for the entire Crestwood showroom team. It was an unusual request, but harmless enough on the surface. No one knew that meeting was about to change everything. Just 15 minutes later, everyone had gathered in the main showroom. The polished cars reflected the bright overhead lights, casting a strange glow over the room, like a stage waiting for its act to begin. Trent walked in last, still wearing his usual nonchalant expression, familiar coffee cup in hand. He looked around and smirked. Surprise meeting. Who started this? Valerie stood at the center, still in her simple lilac outfit, hair tied back, no makeup, but in her eyes was the calm steadiness of someone ready to speak the truth, no matter the cost. She began with a simple sentence. "Thank you all for being here. I just want to share something that I should have said from the start." The room quieted. Everyone froze. Valerie took a deep breath. Her hands didn't tremble, but her heart was pounding not from fear, but because this was the moment she would finally return to herself. "My name isn't Lila." The entire room stiffened. Trent froze. His brows furrowed. The coffee cup in his hand tilted slightly. Valerie continued, now in the voice that was unmistakably hers, the voice of a founder who didn't need to raise it to be heard. "I'm Valerie Harper, CEO and founder of Harper Motors." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped their notebook. Mia covered her mouth in shock. Carlos stepped out from the service bay, frozen in place. Trent staggered back a step, his face draining of color. His grip on the coffee cup tightened until the lid popped off. He didn't even notice. Valerie didn't look at him. She looked at everyone else, every face, every pair of eyes. "I didn't come here to supervise. I came to understand whether the values I built this company on still live inside this room." She paused. Her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't break. And what I found was a painful truth. Her gaze swept across the showroom. I saw silence born from fear, inflated contracts, customers pressured into decisions, and worst of all, good people being dismissed, buried like weeds. No one spoke. Only eyes began to drop to the floor, and a few hands quietly wiped at sweat. Or maybe tears. Then she turned to Trent. For the first time during the meeting, Trent spoke, his voice tight with anger and disbelief. You set me up." Valerie looked him straight in the eyes, not with rage, not with cruelty, but with a deep, unshakable disappointment. "No, Trent, you did this to yourself. I just chose not to look away." She pulled a folded notebook from her pocket and raised it. "These are the things I saw with my own eyes, not filtered through reports. And after what you've said, what you've done..." She took one final breath, then declared, "You're fired." Effective immediately. The room exploded in stunned silence. Trent's mouth opened, then closed again. He stumbled back a step, then said nothing. He turned and walked away. His once confident shoulders now slumped under the weight of losing the only thing he had left, his illusion of power. Valerie turned to face the team again. This time, her eyes no longer belonged to a disguised boss. They belonged to someone bringing back hope, not with money, but with truth. She said, "I can't promise tomorrow will be easy, but I can promise this. Starting today, we begin again, not to sell cars, but to rebuild trust." A slow clap echoed through the room. Then it spread. Then it grew into real applause, not for a title, but for courage. After Trent left the showroom, the air still pulsed with the echo of something unprecedented. A CEO had just fired a top manager, right there, with no warning, no excuses. But Valerie didn't stop there. She knew cutting out rot was necessary. But healing, that was how you bring something back to life. She turned toward the employees, meeting each gaze, from faces still wide-eyed with shock to those now looking up, like shackles had just been unlocked. "I've seen enough to know there are people here who have never abandoned the values we started with." Her voice dropped but grew warmer. Mia, the young woman, jolted upright, a reflex born of fear and stress. Valerie walked over and gently took her hand. "You're not just a salesperson. You are the one preserving the true soul of this company. You know who I am." Mia stammered, her eyes welling up. "Every word you said to customers, the way you listen without judgment, I saw it all." Then she turned to the man standing in the back, trying to avoid attention. Carlos, the strong technician, still in his grease-stained uniform, stepped forward, a wrench still in his hand. He hesitated. I'm just doing my job, ma'am." Valerie nodded, with pride in her eyes. "And because you think that way, you matter even more. Your job is quiet kindness without a certificate." She looked around the room. "I know not everyone here is wrong, and no one is perfect. But from now on, every act of humanity will be recognized, not forgotten." Valerie walked to the coordinator's desk where Trent used to stand and read out sales stats. She removed the top sales of the month board, a plaque filled only with names of those who chased KPIs. She replaced it with a new sign, handwritten in her own notebook, Employee of Integrity, honoring the kindest heart of the month. Then she wrote the first name on the board, MIA Thomas. The applause erupted, but this time it wasn't polite. It was the applause of people who, after years of being unseen, had finally been seen. An older employee stepped toward Valerie. It was Jake, the one who'd been scolded for taking his wife to dialysis. He spoke softly, but loud enough for all to hear. "We thought you'd forgotten about us." Valerie took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I didn't forget. I just stayed away too long. But I'm not going anywhere now. We're going to rebuild together." She didn't promise instant raises. She didn't roll out a flashy 5-year plan. She just said one thing: we will rebuild Harper Motors not with spreadsheets, but with people. And somehow, that alone began to change the room. The way they looked at each other, the way they breathed, the way they began to see one another not as competitors, but as teammates. When the meeting ended, the showroom slowly returned to business as usual, but not the same kind of usual. A strange silence settled in. Not the silence of fear, but the stillness of trust. Returning. Valerie gathered up her lilac disguise, the simple button-up shirt, the untouched sales goal sheet she'd never turned in. She looked at it one last time, folded it neatly, and placed it in a cardboard box. She stepped out of the break room, the one where, for days, she'd eaten alone, scribbled quietly, watched in silence. Now, the door eased shut behind her, like the final page of a chapter turned. Outside, the sunset bathed the parked cars in soft amber, blurring their edges. She walked slowly past each one, not to inspect, but to feel. Years ago, she had sat behind those wheels, wiped every speck of dust before delivering each car to its new owner. Back then, cars were just a means to connect people. And now, after all this, she finally understood what needed fixing wasn't the product. It was how we treat one another. A young employee jogged up beside her, hesitating before asking, "Ms. Valerie, do you really believe we can change everything?" Valerie smiled, a real smile, not meant to inspire, not for show. "I don't think," she said. "I know." She placed a hand on his shoulder. Because change doesn't start with the system. It starts with one person who refuses to stay silent. And today, I saw more than one of those people here. On her way to her car, Valerie spotted Mia standing in the lot, clutching an old bag, still in her showroom uniform, heading home by bus. Valerie asked, "Yeah, my car's broken down, but it's okay. I'm used to it," Mia replied with a gentle smile. Valerie paused, thought for a moment, then popped the trunk of her car and pulled out a set of keys. "You know how to drive a sedan." "Right." Mia's eyes widened. "You, the car you picked for that older lady today, is the same one I picked for my mother 10 years ago. Now, I think it's time that car helps someone like you go even farther." Mia froze. She couldn't say a word. she just embraced Valerie, not like hugging a CEO, but like holding someone who had truly seen her. That night, Valerie sat in her car, staring at the now dimmed lights of the showroom, but inside her, a fire had reignited, quiet, but steady. She pulled out her phone and typed one final entry into a hidden folder named Undercover Disguise, helped me see what position once obscured. But kindness, it sees clearly, no matter the rank. I've returned to myself, but I'll never return to who I used to be. A few weeks after that fateful meeting, Valerie returned to the Crestwood showroom, this time with no dyed hair, no fake name on a badge, just herself, CEO of Harper Motors. But something had changed. She wasn't there to supervise. She was there to listen. The once cold space now echoed with gentle laughter. Morning meetings were no longer about hitting numbers. They became spaces to share customer stories, personal moments, little things that once slipped through the cracks. A new sign now hung in the break room. We serve with kindness, not pressure. Below it were handwritten notes from Jake, Mia, Carlos, sharing moments when a customer hugged them or when a child thanked them for keeping a promise to their mum. Valerie didn't need to take notes anymore. She just smiled quietly because she knew Harper Motors had finally returned to where it began, the human heart. In a later interview, a reporter asked her, "You've led hundreds of employees, generated millions of dollars. What are you most proud of?" Valerie didn't need long to answer. She looked directly into the camera as if speaking to someone who's never been seen. "I used to think my greatest achievement was scaling the company, but now I know. The real achievement is when kind people no longer feel the need to stay silent. When compassion stops being mistaken for weakness. When employees are recognized not just for performance, but for character." She paused. Her eyes shimmered, but her smile remained gentle and unshaken. "We can't change the whole world in one day, but we can change a company. And sometimes, just changing one company is enough to remind the good ones out there they're not alone." At a small diner on the outskirts of town, Carlos was having lunch with his daughter. Mia passed by and waved, no longer the timid new hire, but a voice on the customer service reform team. At a nearby table, Jake told stories to a group of new recruits. "One time, I thought I was going to get fired for showing up late. Turns out, that's the day we rebuilt the whole company." And Valerie. She sat in the main conference room at HQ, writing the first page of a new notebook. Leadership isn't about commanding from above. It's about stepping down and having the courage to hear what no one dares to say. Not everyone with a title is a leader, and sometimes the true leader is the one who dares to ask, "What have we forgotten?" True leadership isn't about authority. It's about courage, the courage to see, to listen, and to rebuild. Because in the end, a company isn't built with steel and glass, but with people who are trusted, respected, and allowed to live in alignment with their hearts. If you ever believed only the powerful could change the system, remember this woman who quietly stepped into the dark to reignite the light with nothing but her kindness. Sometimes, you don't need power. You just need enough courage to look truth in the eye and not turn away. Because the world doesn't change through those who command. It changes through those who dare to listen and act.